Is in-group fragility actually a bad thing? Is that weird? Is it even wrong? Hey everybody, it's Prince of Queens, and I hope that you had a lovely Thanksgiving weekend. I took the whole weekend off because I was literally starting to have dreams about politics and having to explain the politics in my dream. And then I woke up and realized that the happening didn't even happen. And I was like, really? I have to actually just not work. I worked on a little bit of a project scripting, but that's it. So yeah, I have this concept. Is in-group fragility wrong? Is it maybe not even kind of preferable? And I kind of realized that I'm borrowing in title a little bit from Benjamin Boyce. I feel like that's the type of thing that he would talk about. You know, fragility, blah, blah, blah. I'm Benjamin Boyce, fragility. But, oh well, I really like him, so I don't care. I went over to my mother's community for Thanksgiving, and I took a friend who is a racial minority without giving away too many details. And the thing is that my mother's community is white, pretty much exclusively. And they're the nicest people, and they're white far leftists generally. Like, I don't think they've ever had a Republican over there, and there'll be like 40 people at these dinners because it's this kind of community thing, and they're really good people, and they actually participate in activism. Sometimes they do things that are probably pretty undeniably good. Sometimes they get into things that I'm a little bit iffy about. For example, there's a lot of Black Lives Matter signs around, and, you know, whatever. I'm certainly not going to tell a black person not to have a Black Lives Matter sign. I might disagree with them about politics and even disagree with them about Black Lives Matter, but at the same time, Black lives do matter, and especially if you're a black person, I see no reason to not reaffirm that. But it does start to get a little bit weird when it's a community of entirely white people who have Black Lives Matter signs for obvious reasons. Do I really need to explain how that's a slightly awkward thing? So when I bring over a racial minority to the community, and my friend, she's like literally one of, I think maybe there was one other racial minority that was there, she's gonna obviously have to ask me ahead of time what type of community this is, what is the makeup, because, you know, she knows that I'm white, so she assumes that my parents are white, and she wants to know, am I going to be one of the only racial minorities? Because this is Seattle. That's just the type of question that you ask. You know, like, I'm a gay guy. If we're going to go over to straight people's houses, well, a lot of the time I assume that, you know, like a party that she would bring me to would only be straight people, which wasn't entirely true, but largely was true with the other parties her and I went together for the past couple of weekends. If I were to ask, is it only going to be straight people? She wouldn't care. That's a perfectly normal question for me to ask. So she kind of asked that, and I explained to her, well, yeah, but it's white activists, and in particular, there's a lot of Jewish people, actually. And sure enough, we get there, and she's like, ooh, you were right. This is a bunch of white folks, you know, kind of, she didn't say folks, but, you know, it was kind of like that attitude. But they're all very nice to her. Maybe, asked a question or two that was kind of like almost reminding her that she's a racial minority on a day that she doesn't necessarily want to think about it. But overall, she seemed perfectly happy about the thing. So I ended up speaking with my mother a few days later, and my mother asked me, did you guys have a good time? We went to a party afterwards, like more of a all-night party at somebody's house, and my mom wanted to know that whether or not we had a good time once we got there. So I said, oh yeah, everything's good. So I told my mom about it, and I also explained to my mom, yeah, you know, there was a little bit of a words about the fact that your community is all white people. And, you know, I explained that it's really nice white people that are, you know, very into being multicultural and that kind of a thing. And they will try to talk about things like Black Lives Matter, but then there's not really any black people. And she saw that, and she wondered what it would be like if you were to ever bring actual black people over there, because, you know, there's a difference between black activists. And my mother started saying, well, but there's a number of people in the community that work with, she said, the homeless, prison populations, that kind of a thing. And I was like, yeah, well, Mom, I mean, there's a difference between the homeless, people in prison, and black activists as opposed to average black people. And my mom was like, yeah, well, I think that maybe you blah, blah, blah. And my mom started getting kind of defensive. And if I were some total little asshole, I could have accused my mother of having white fragility at that moment. But I didn't, because I just had this sense that, yeah, I was saying something that was going to make her feel uncomfortable, and she had every right to slightly feel uncomfortable about that. So I had a few days to process that, and I was thinking to myself, what was it about that interaction that was kind of weird? And what I realized is that I don't think that I should have not said anything at all, but because it's good for my mom to have the reminder that, like, you know, as much as you guys try to be this inclusive community of white people, you're still a community of white people. And, like, hey, maybe sometimes you should remember that. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, you could go down to a southern community of all Republican conservatives that would very likely be more diverse at some Baptist church, you know, and far leftists in Seattle, they should remember that. So I don't think I did like a wrong thing, but at the same time, my mom certainly was not being inappropriate by getting defensive. She was not exhibiting some sort of thing that should be demonized called white fragility by wanting to defend her community and wanting to defend their attitudes by any means. So then I started thinking about what would be a comparable scenario. And I realized that a comparable scenario would be, let's say you were from a black family and you have always celebrated family Thanksgivings with that family and some friends, and it's exclusively black people. You know, like only black people and mixed people, and maybe, no, just black people. And that happens. Like, I've been to a black family reunion one time when I was really little, and it was only for the black family. And I was there as the one white kid who was friends with the one little first grader. And it was very exclusive to be for the family. Now, I don't think it was exclusive because they didn't want white people around. It was more just like it was geared to be for the black family. So imagine that you were a black college-age student that was a part of that family, and you went to college for your second semester, or I guess second year, and then showed up at your Thanksgiving, and you had a moment with your father and said, yeah, it was interesting, you know, having Thanksgiving with you guys, because I forget that the only people that you guys know are black. And Thanksgiving was about white pilgrims, white settlers, and Native Americans. But we're all black. Now, would you be surprised if your father were to be like, boy, what are you talking about? And maybe start yelling at you a little bit and start trying to defend the family and be like, we have always been here. We've been brought over. These traditions are part of our family. We have been cooking the same food for a few hundred years. We blah, 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 blah. And he'd have every reason to say such things, because it's this, people are defensive of the in-group to the point where it can almost appear slightly fragile. It can almost look like these people are easily triggered when it comes to criticizing not just themselves, but the people that they have the most tribalistic in common with, the people that they consider their tribe, such as their close family, not just based around being the close family, but also based around the color of their close family if they share one color in common. And then you think about, evolutionary biology, and of course it's that way. Of course people are very, very vehement about defending one's own. And then I think about it and it's like, well, I do that with homosexuality. Like, if people are trying too much to criticize gay men, if it's, I don't know, young, non-binary feminist people trying to say that gay men never did anything for civil rights for LGBT people, I get very defensive, very defensive. Now, not just because that's completely untrue, but I have a tendency to get pretty defensive of gay men when people entirely forget about the good things about gay men. And that's just logical. That's completely logical. And maybe having the instinct, the tendency to just go ahead and snap like that to the point where others could call it fragility actually keeps the tribe, the group, going. Does that make sense? Like, maybe without that, you would be weaker and you'd be less likely to survive. So you should always, know when you're overreacting, and hey, peace on earth, and certainly don't let people get away with things just because they're a part of your same socio-cultural demographic or whatever. But at the same time, like, this demonization of people for having that instinct, that's completely irrational. And it's a big slap in the face of every bit of evolutionary biology. That's all. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Back to the rat race, I guess.